I always think of them with a great deal of sorrow and regret for what my family, the part my family played in the stealing, really, of this country, the theft of this country. I commit myself to rejoicing at the fact that people in all around Australia, or Indigenous people all around Australia, are reclaiming their languages and their cultures and taking their rightful place in the body politic of Australia. So it's with those thoughts that I come to you from Ngudgery land, Ngudgery country. Okay, I think we might start with some meditation for about, say, 15 minutes. That's the normal period of time, Meredith, you said, or was it 20 minutes?
Well, it's flexible thing. It's like, yeah, it can be anything.
Okay, and does it need to be a guided meditation, or are you all okay to meditate alone? Not alone, but yourselves under your own steam?
Yeah, probably with a little bit of guidance would be good on Zoom.
Okay. So find a way to sit comfortably. With your back straight, but relaxed. Your back doesn't have to be like a ramrod. It can be nice and straight, but still relaxed. And what will help that is if you're sitting, whether you're sitting on a cushion or in a chair or wherever you're sitting, to make sure that your bottom is in touch with the ground, and you can either sit in a chair or
Thay, I think your signal is not very good, so we are losing you a little bit.
I'm not sure I can do anything about that. Is there anything I can do about it?
Yeah, I think that's okay now. It's just now it's like some missing signal. Yeah, that's fine now. Yeah.
It's interesting because last night I belong to a Buddhist poetry group that's in Sydney, and one of the people in Sydney, we kept losing her, but the other people were also in Sydney, so I don't know what happens. It could be the weather.
Yeah, but it's fine now. It's fine.
Okay, so you're sitting nice and upright but comfortable, and your eyes can either be open, but very softly open and gazing about 1 meter in front of you, or you can keep your eyes closed. You can place your hands in your lap, your left hand on top of your right hand, or one hand on each thigh, whichever you are most used to and most comfortable with. You sit with your shoulders relaxed, and imagine that there is a thread attached to the crown of your head at one end and to the ceiling at the other end, and your head is bobbing on the end of this thread. Then you imagine that you take that thread between your forefinger and your thumb, and you gently pull it upwards, and you'll notice that your back straightens nicely. Tuck your chin in so that your nose is in line with your abdomen. And relax, maintaining this posture for the period of the meditation. The meditation we'll practice is simple breathing meditation, mindfulness of our breathing. So take 3 breaths. You don't have to overexert yourself, but just make them reasonably deep breaths. Breathing in through the nostrils and breathing out through the mouth. Relax into the chair or on the floor, allowing the chair or the floor to do all the work of holding you up. Come back to your breath, a normal breathing, nothing special, no need for a special meditation breath. It's your normal breath, breathing in and breathing out. breathing in and breathing out. And for the period of the meditation, just do your best to keep your attention on your in-breath and your out-breath. And if it is of help to you, as you breathe in, you can say the word in. As you breathe out, you can say the word out. Just to help keep your attention on your in-breath and your out-breath. If your attention wanders from your breath, that's not a problem. That's normal. The mind will go wherever it wants to go without your permission. So when you notice that your mind has wandered, you simply bring your attention back to your in-breath and out-breath without any judgment or worry. This is a normal process. So just keep your attention as best you can on your in-breath and your out-breath. Breathing in, breathing out, keeping your attention as best you can on your in-breath and your out-breath. Breathing in, breathing out, keeping your attention as best you can on your in-breath and your out-breath. Breathing in, breathing out. breathing in, breathing out, keeping your attention as best you can on your in-breath and your out-breath. Particularly as you experience that breath in the nostrils, or with the rising of the chest and the falling of the chest, or with the expansion or contraction of the abdomen. Wherever your attention is best held, keep it there, noticing the in-breath and the out-breath. So you might like to stretch a little bit, roll your arms, do whatever you need to shake the stiffness out of your body, if there is indeed any stiffness. We wish to revere with speech, mind and body the Buddha, the one who shows us the way in this life. Namo Shakyamunaya Buddhaya. Namo Shakyamunaya Buddhaya. Namo Shakyamunaya Buddhaya. So before we start the actual talk, there are a couple of things I wanted to say. One is that at the very beginning, when I came online and Meredith and I were talking, Meredith mentioned to me that Bhante Tejadamo doesn't particularly like Zoom and giving talks on Zoom. And I think there are a couple of arguments for both liking Zoom and not liking Zoom. When you give a Dhamma talk in person, there's a different kind of energy let loose. When you're with other people, you tend to bounce off of each other, and there's a whole lot of feelings that are more available to you when you're in person. But we are not in person here tonight. We can see each other's faces and that sort of thing. So that's one of the limitations. But on the other hand, it means that we can meet with people from all around the world. And I do that every so often with people in New York, where I'm doing a course in contemplative care with the New York Zen Center for Contemplative Care. And although there are those limitations of not being able to be with others and not being able to experience the energy that's generated when people are together, it's still better than nothing. And it's certainly quite lovely. And it also means that you can join in on a Zoom meeting if you're not feeling particularly well, or if you can't actually get out of the house because of the COVID restrictions or because of health issues. So, you know, there's fors and against Zoom. Well, one of the things I've noticed tonight is there's a lot of names on this on the screen, but no faces attached to those names. So if you're really there, it would be lovely from my point of view to be able to see who you are. If you're really uncomfortable being online, well, that's another question. But I'm really happy to see your face in exactly the place you are. Thank you. The other thing too is that I'm not a very formal person. I come from a place called Port Adelaide, which is a very working class dockside city, and we're just ordinary people from there. So it's very hard for me to be really formal. And I remember once asking a group of Vietnamese people, do you think I should be more formal with you? And they said to me, no, Thay, no, we like you just the way you are, because that means we can get close to you. So I'm afraid I'm not going to be formal. I'm just going to be myself. And I hope that you are able to be yourselves too. So rather than necessarily think of this as a formal Dharma talk, I'd rather adopt an approach that the Baha'is take. They don't sit around and have talks about Dharma talks, or whatever they call them, talks about the Baha'i faith. They have what they call fireside chats. So we might think of this as just a fireside chat. There you are at home, having a cup of tea or coffee, sitting in your favorite armchair. And here I am in my sitting room doing somewhat similar, except I haven't got a cup of tea with me. So let's think of this more as a fireside chat than a very formal Dharma talk. Is that okay? Are you happy about that? You don't need me to be a prince of the church or anything like that? Good.
I think everyone's comfortable, Thay.
Okay, good. Another thing that I thought of this morning when I woke up is, oh, goodness me, I've got to give a Dharma talk tonight. And I'm never very convinced that I'm good at giving Dharma talks. I think I'm a better teacher than a preacher. So I'll explain why I think that in a minute. And I thought to myself, the other thing is that, and this is a little doubt that creeps in every so often, that really I'm a Westerner, and what would I know about Buddhism? I've only been involved in Buddhism since 1978. So that's not a very long time, you know. It took something like 500 years for the Dharma to take root in China, and then another 300 or 400 years for it to move from China to Japan. And here I've been around for about 40 odd years. So that's not very long. So how much do I really know? And when I give a Dharma talk, how certain can I be that I'm actually talking about what the Buddha was talking about, or what the great teachers of the Buddha Dharma over the centuries are talking about? I just hope that what I say tonight makes some sense to you, and that it is in accordance with the basic teachings of Buddhism. And so I will now put aside my doubts about myself and get on with the Dharma talk. one of the things, before I ever went to Sangha Lodge to stay, I knew that Sangha Lodge was the home of the Association of Engaged Buddhism. And I had met Bhante Tejadhammo at a retreat that he led in Adelaide, and he struck me as being a very nice monk. So I had always been predisposed towards the Association of Engaged Buddhism. And some of that is because I too belong to that tradition within Buddhism, the tradition of engaged Buddhism. And there are roots of the roots of that are really in my family life. My family was very much involved in the community in Port Adelaide during the 1950s and the 1960s. And on both sides of my family, they were involved, or we were involved, in the growth of the labour movement in that place, because it's a very working class area, and it was the home of the Waterside Workers Union and those kind of unions. And so I grew up in a milieu that was focused on peace and social change and social justice. And that was the air I breathed as a child. And I was supported in that really by my mother's father, my grandfather, whose name I received. William is my middle name, and that was my grandpa's first name. And he and I were very close, and I loved him very much. And I still think of him practically every day. And today is, I think, the 58th anniversary of his passing. So I remember that every October 14th, which in 1963 also happened to be Labor Day. So it seemed appropriate that my grandpa should die on Labor Day. So I grew up in a milieu that was, as I said, focused on peace and social change and social justice. And when I was 20, I had to sign up for national service in Australia, and I did so as a conscientious objector because I didn't want to go to Vietnam to kill old people and young people in a country I knew almost nothing about, simply because my government said I must. And my government was saying that I must because it wanted to keep in good with the United States. So I signed up as a conscientious objector against that war. And I went in moratorium marches to protest against Australia's involvement in the war in Vietnam. So it was no real surprise to me that I found myself drawn to Vietnamese Zen, first in Thich Nhat Hanh's tradition, and then later in the tradition that I belong to, the Trúc tradition. It was Thich Nhat Hanh who, in fact, coined the term engaged Buddhism. But he's not the only person, the only monk involved in that whole general movement of engaged Buddhism. There is another teacher, or there was another teacher, that I found myself attracted to, and that was Ajahn Buddhadasa Bhikkhu, who translated the Chinese Chan teacher Huangpo's work on the transmission of mind. He translated it into Thai. And I always recommend Ajahn Buddhadasa Bhikkhu's book, The Heartwood of the Bodhi Tree, which concerns sunyata, or emptiness, or voidness, as a really seminal text in terms of understanding the part that our attachment to the I, me, mind thought plays in the really destructive behaviours that human beings seem to be capable of. Buddhadasa Bhikkhu himself was accused by the people in Bangkok of being both a communist and a Mahayanist, as if those things were bad. From the point of view of the high-up monks in Bangkok, being a Mahayanist was much worse than being a communist. So Buddhadasa Bhikkhu really crossed a line when he translated Huangpo's Chan work on the transmission of mind. And so so when it came to the kind of Buddhism that I would be interested in, I was naturally drawn to engage Buddhism. I was naturally drawn to a kind of Buddhism that would translate the insights of the Buddha into positive and wholesome social action. And that's where I sit today. I grew up, as I think Meredith pointed out, within a Christian context. I grew up as a young Methodist, and then became an Anglican when I realized I wanted to be a monk, and there weren't Methodist monks. So I grew up as a Christian with a great love for Jesus. And I say that even now I am a Buddhist monk who loves Jesus. And then I ask the question, so what's not to love about someone who proclaims love for everybody? I came to the Buddha Dharma in 1978 when I was 26 years old, and I'm now almost 70. And I joined a Tibetan group. I was drawn to the Bodhisattva ideal within that group because I could easily recognize Jesus as a Bodhisattva, someone who would lay down his life for the benefit of others. So Chan or Tien in Vietnamese, or Zen in Japanese, or Sun in Korean, and the Bodhisattva ideal form the core of my spirituality. I also recognize the limits placed on my Buddhist understanding, as I said, due to the fact that I'm a Westerner with a mind formed entirely by Western understandings. So please understand that whatever I say is a Western and a South Australian interpretation of the Buddha's teachings, opened up for me in a person-to-person way by my precious teacher, the most venerable Thay, Thích Tanta, who lives in Long Tan in Vietnam. The other thing I want to say about this Dharma talk is that it's really, in a way, an extension of a Dharma talk I gave at Sangha Lodge on November the 13th, 2019, almost exactly 2 years ago. This time, however, I'm going to consider a range of texts, one from the Zen tradition of Zen Master Dogen, who was the Japanese founder of the Soto Zen tradition, and one from Shanti Deva from the Indian Mahayana tradition. He was a monk in the 8th century. The third textual part of the talk is a well-known Jataka tale, so I haven't left out Theravada Buddhism by any stretch of the imagination. And then I want to share with you some reflections on the 4 great vows, sometimes called the 4 Bodhisattva vows. So I'm going to read you a passage from Zen Master Dogen's Zuimonki, from his work Zuimonki Shobogenzo. And this is the story of a Chan master, Jijue. In ancient times, a person called Zen Master Jijue aroused the mind of awakening, or bodhicitta, and left home. This master was originally a government official. He was a wealthy, straightforward, and wise man. While he was a provincial governor, he unlawfully appropriated official money and gave it to the people, perhaps a little bit like Robin Hood. One of the officials working with him reported this to the government. Upon hearing it, the emperor was astonished and puzzled. All of the ministers also thought it strange. Because the crime was not a minor one, it was decided that Jijue would be put to death. At that time, the emperor talked the matter over and said, "This officer is a man of talent and wisdom. Now, he intentionally committed this crime, but he might have deeply considered his actions." When he is about to be beheaded, if he looks sorrowful and regretful, cut off his head immediately. If it does not show such an expression, he certainly had some profound motivation. Don't execute him. So when the imperial messenger brought him out for his beheading, he showed neither regret nor grief. Instead, he looked joyful. He said to himself, "I offer my life in this lifetime to all living beings. The messenger, astonished and beguiled, reported this to the emperor. The emperor said, "I thought so. He must have had some deeper motivation. I knew beforehand that he had some justification." Then he asked Zhijue what the reason was. The master said, "I wanted to leave the bureaucracy, offer up my life and practice in order to form a connection with living beings." I think that's still a good motivation for leaving the bureaucracy. "I wish to be born in the Buddha's family and wholeheartedly practice the Buddha way." The emperor was moved by his aspiration and gave him permission to become a monk. Then the emperor gave him the Dharma name Yanshu, meaning prolonged life. This was because he had been saved from capital punishment. So today's patch-robed monks must also arouse aspiration like this at least once. We should arouse the mind that thinks little of our own life, has deep compassion for all living beings, and entrusts our bodily life to the Buddha's teachings. If we have already aroused such an aspiration even once, we should protect it and not lose it. It is not possible to actualize the Buddha Dharma without having once aroused such an aspiration. And that aspiration was to give your life for the benefit of sentient beings. Now, it refers to patch monk robes, but I don't think Dogen is limiting himself to the monastic Sangha. Dogen is speaking about the whole of the fourfold Sangha: monks, nuns, laywomen, and laymen. And Dogen is suggesting here, or the story of Zhijue here, is rather a large request of us. He asks the master, "Why did you do this? What motivated you?" And the master said, "I wanted to leave the bureaucracy." Now, the bureaucracy would be not unlike a bureaucracy now here in Australia, a comfortable life, a place of some repute where you would gain a good reputation. But he was prepared to give that up and to offer his life and practice in order to form a connection with living beings. "I wish to be born in the Buddha's family and wholeheartedly practice the Buddha's way." And then he goes on to say, or then Dogen goes on to say, "We should arouse the mind, bodhicitta, that thinks little of our own life, has deep compassion for all living beings, and entrusts our bodily life to the Buddha's teachings." Very stirring and inspiring words. But the question arises, am I prepared to do that? What am I prepared to give up for the benefit of all living beings? Am I prepared to lay my own life on the line for the sake of sentient beings? So now we go on to another text. This text is from Shanti Deva. And Shanti Deva was an 8th century Indian monk in the Mahayana tradition. And he wrote a couple of treatises. The best known one is called the Bodhicharyavatara, which means the guide to the Bodhisattva path. And within, I think it's the first, no, it's the second chapter, I think, he composes a litany, a very beautiful litany. At least it's beautiful in English. I don't know what it's like in Sanskrit. I don't read Sanskrit, but in English, it strikes me as being very beautiful. And this is what it says. "May I be the medicine and the physician for the sick. May I be their nurse until the illness never recurs. With showers of food and drink, May I overcome the afflictions of hunger and thirst. May I become food and drink during these times of famine. May I be an inexhaustible treasury for the destitute. With various forms of assistance, may I remain in their presence. For the sake of accomplishing the welfare of all sentient beings, I freely give up my body, enjoyments, and all my virtues of the 3 times. Surrendering everything is nirvana, and my mind seeks nirvana. If I must surrender everything, it is better that I give it to sentient beings. May I be a protector for those who are without protectors, a guide for travelers, and a boat, a bridge, and a ship for those who wish to cross over. May I be a lamp for those who seek light, a bed for those who seek rest, and may I be a servant for all beings who desire a servant. To all sentient beings, may I be a wish-fulfilling gem, a vase of good fortune, an efficacious mantra, a great medication, a wish-fulfilling tree, and a wish-granting cow. Just as earth and other elements are useful in various ways to innumerable sentient beings dwelling throughout infinite space, so may I be in various ways a source of life for the sentient beings present throughout space until they are all liberated. And now, and this is a prayer of the Dalai Lama, and now as long as space endures, as long as there are beings to be found, may I continue likewise to remain, to drive away the sorrows of the world. Now that I find enormously inspiring, but I also find it very big, a very big request of myself to offer everything I have and I am for the sake of sentient beings. And the last verse that says, and now as long as space endures, as long as there are beings to be found, may I continue likewise to remain to drive away the sorrows of the world, forms the basis, in a sense, of the Bodhisattva's commitment, the commitment to be reborn constantly, to not to enjoy the great benefit of nirvana until every being throughout the whole universe, the whole of the Dharma realm, is able to enjoy the same thing. Very big, very big. And now a story, a Jataka tale. This is bound to be one that you've all heard, but bear with me. Once in a former life of the Buddha, he was born as a very kind man who one day went out walking, and he climbed to the top of the hill, only to find at the top of the hill that there was a deep ravine going down, down, down. And at the bottom of the ravine, he spied a tigress with her cubs. But this tigress had not eaten for days, and she was very thin, and she had no milk to feed her cubs. So the man, out of his compassion and his generosity, threw himself off the top of the ravine and allowed the tigress to eat him. And so he gave his body so that she could produce the milk to feed her cubs. This is the kind of generosity, this is the kind of compassion and love that the Buddha-to-be had for sentient beings. It's a story to inspire us to offer ourselves so completely for the sake of others. So these three texts from Zen Master Dogen, from Shanti Deva, and from the Jataka tales all point to one thing, that with the arising of the thought of awakening, we're called upon to give everything for the sake of others, for the sake of all beings. One of the things I notice is that there are Mahayanists who espouse the Bodhisattva ideal, and they criticize Theravadins because their practice is selfish. Their practice is just about me. But I also notice that there are a lot of Mahayanists who are quite selfish, who practice in such a way that their only concern is with their own enlightenment. And then I notice there are Theravadins who adhere to the Arahant ideal, but they do a lot of work for the benefit of other beings, such as those monks in Thailand who open up their monastery to support people dying with AIDS in the past, or those monks in Thailand who set up opportunities for volunteer vets to come and care for street dogs. There are all the great teachers like Venerable Ajahn Chah or Ajahn Buddhadasa Bhikkhu, or all the other great Thai and Burmese monks, for example, and the Sri Lankans, who spend their life teaching the Dharma and organising for communities to form around them. Now, anybody who's ever tried to form a Sangha knows just how difficult that is. And of course, it's one of the stories of the Buddha's life, who, when he found that the monks in his Sangha were fighting over various ideas, he decided to go off and stay in the jungle with the tigers, because that was safer than staying with the other monks. So forming a Sangha, being a teacher, is not an easy path. It's a path of self-giving love. So I think that those Mahayanists who say the Theravadins are selfish and those Theravadins who say the Mahayanists are wrong, they're both wrong. It's a bit like when the French say the English are cold and the English say the French are arrogant. I mean, you can meet cold and arrogant people anywhere, and you can meet really lovely, warm English people and very, very humble French people. You can meet Theravadins who are giving their lives for the sake of sentient beings, just as the Mahayanists claim that they are. So these are stories, these three stories, actually, I find them really encouraging from that point of view. And then, of course, there are the 4 great vows that every Mahayanist monk and nun make at their ordination. They're called the 4 great vows, or the 4 Bodhisattva vows. And this is what they are. This is one translation. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. The Dharmas are boundless. I vow to master them. The Buddha way is unattainable. I vow to attain it. So when I was in the Christian church, I used to think that praying for peace was a waste of time, because human beings, they're always drawn to violence and hatred and greed. What's the point of praying for peace? And when I think of the Bodhisattva vows, I think, well, they're unattainable within the context of samsara, within the context of the world of coming and going. But if we stopped praying for peace, if we stopped making those Bodhisattva vows, what would happen? We wouldn't form the great aspirations that we have to bring benefit to all living beings. Unattainable as the Bodhisattva path, the path of self-giving love in service, may seem to us, if we just assume that it's unattainable and don't undertake it, then we will most assuredly be stuck in the darkness of greed, hatred, and ignorance or illusion. So the decision that I come to all the time is, yes, these Bodhisattva vows are unattainable. All of the great lessons from Zen Master Dogen, Shanti Deva, and the Jataka tales, they all seem impossible and unattainable. But I'm going to try anyway. I'm going to take that path anyway, regardless of whether I'm capable of it or not. Who knows? Who knows what I'm capable of until I undertake the path? And if I don't succeed in this lifetime, well, there's always the future. There's always something to look forward to. So when it was made more clear to me recently about the unattainability of the Bodhisattva vows, I began to ask myself the question, does the Bodhisattva have to be heroic? Or can she or he be ordinary, responding to the suffering of sentient beings in a moment-by-moment, case-by-case way? I became aware that in spite of my conditioning as a young person, and in spite of my conditioning as the result of being the oldest child in a family that was not always a particularly happy family, maybe there was another way to do all of this rather than be a hero. Because being a hero wasn't working for me. And I discovered what arose in me anyway was the thought of being a moment-by-moment bodhisattva. Being a bodhisattva who is just present to each moment as it arises. A bodhisattva who responds with self-giving love to everything as it arises moment by moment in our lives. And these don't have to be grand gestures. They don't have to be big things. I think Mother Teresa, who's I think become slightly mythologized over the years, and she has her critics. She used to say something about what's important is not to respond to the world with great acts of love, but to respond with love to every small event in the world. And I think that's what is meant by the moment-by-moment bodhisattva. So this year, on the 13th of September, I was seized by the muse, the poetic muse, and I wrote a poem. And interestingly enough, I gave this bodhisattva a Vietnamese name. And I checked it out with my Dharma sister in Perth, who's a Vietnamese nun. And so Meredith has brought it up on the screen. So I'll read it to you. And in reading it, you may notice that I'm definitely there in that poem. I'm not separate from my own reflection. And it has a Vietnamese title. So I'll read that as well. Thay Bồ Tát, moment by moment bodhisattva, marinated in utopian hopes and the heavenly kingdom, had big plans for the universe. Firstborn son, oldest child, he grew up as a hero. But Hero Bodhisattva didn't work. Real life and weariness put a stop to that. Then he discovered tidying the garden with his younger brother, walking the beach joyfully with his dogs, washing the dishes for his household. He had uncovered the moment-by-moment bodhisattva who could rest, breathe, and touch all things as they really are. In my upbringing, both as a Christian and as a member of a family that was socially active, socially engaged, there were the great hopes great utopian hopes, the hopes for a better world that I would help bring about, partially the arising of the kingdom of heaven in the Christian faith, and the utopian hopes that arise in, I suppose, the socialist worldview, that there would be a great revolution or a kingdom of heaven that would arrive. Big plans I had for the whole of the universe, which I suppose is a bit arrogant, really. But then I was only in my 20s after all, and people in their 20s are allowed to have big dreams, I think. I was also the firstborn son and the oldest child, number one son, which is very large shoes to have to wear, especially in a family that wasn't particularly happy. My parents had a very difficult marriage and it ended in a very acrimonious divorce. My dad was, I don't like to say this, I think it sounds a bit like a curse, but my dad was an alcoholic. My dad was much more than an alcoholic. He was a good man. And when he died, I found his cupboard, his wardrobe, full of his clothes, all beautifully clean and neatly stacked. And yet he had a big addiction to alcohol. So with reservations, because I don't think that the word alcohol covers the whole of his humanity, I would say that my dad was an alcoholic. And my mother was a very volatile person. My mother was mostly Irish in her background, and so she she was quite beautiful, as indeed the Irish can be. And she was also quite volatile, as the Irish can be. So here am I on the one hand with a dad who was a drinker and a mum who was a bit volatile. And I was the oldest child, and often I had to negotiate a way through to calming them down when they would argue, and particularly in protecting my brother. And so being the firstborn son and the oldest child in my family put me into this situation of having to be like a hero. And I carried that into my life. I carried that thought that, well, if the world is going to change, it's all going to be on my shoulders because after all, I'm a hero. But that isn't how things worked out. Life doesn't work out quite according to our ideals necessarily. And it makes you very tired to have to carry that burden. And now my brother has vascular dementia. He's 7.5 years younger than me. He's my baby brother. And I tell him regularly that I loved him before he was even born. I didn't even know him and I loved him. So now what I do is I visit him every week and we work away in his garden doing small things. And I take him to the dog park with my dogs and we eat Subway and watch the dogs run around and he talks to people. And then I take him to the gym in the afternoon. I take my dogs to the beach where they get to experience enormous joy and I get to experience lots of mudita, the joy of others. And I have this very strong conviction that the Bodhisattva is there for all sentient beings, not just human beings, but all sentient beings. And so the care I show my dogs is part of my vow. And then the other thing I think of is that I share a house with an Anglican priest who is sometimes a bit unwell. So I just assume the role mostly of doing the cooking and washing the dishes, making sure the dishes are washed. And I think that within the context of my own life, that is the moment by moment bodhisattva. And I allow myself time to rest, to breathe, and to touch all things as they really are. That's how I've come to understand it for myself. And the last thing I want to say is that yesterday, October 13th, was my parents', it would have been my parents' 70th wedding anniversary. And even if your parents divorce and they don't even like each other very much, the child doesn't have to take on that burden. The fact is that on the 13th of October in 1951, my family came into being with the marriage of those two people. And subsequently they had me, and they had my sister, and they had my brother. And I love my sister and I love my brother. My sister had two children, my niece and nephew, and I love my niece and nephew as if they were my children. And then my niece had 3 children and my nephew had 2 children. So they're equivalent in some ways to my grandchildren, and I love them too. So if it hadn't been for this wedding 70 years ago yesterday, I wouldn't have those people in my life. And that would be a great loss to me. Mm-hmm. So I don't regret my parents' marriage, and I don't even regret them arguing for years and years and years. They didn't have an easy time of it. And I don't blame them for that. That's just the way life came to them. And they were as good a parent as they could be. They were good enough as far as parents are concerned. So what I want to say now is that the ordinariness, the moment by moment Bodhisattva resides very firmly in parents. Sometimes Vietnamese people say to me, "Oh, Thay, you're much lighter than we are. You're much freer than we are because you don't have children." And I say to them, well, that might be so, maybe. But I don't have the consolations of having children. When my mother and father died, I was right by their side. In spite of all of the arguments over 45 or 50 years or so of being a family, I was right by their side. I cared for my mother. I bathed my mother when I was a novice monk. I know that there are parents who don't have that in their lives. Their children don't care for them, but I did, and my brother did, and my sister did. So I don't have that possibility in my life. Who's going to do that for me when I get to be an old man or an older man? And the other thing is that your children never turn out the way you want them to. No. You might have great plans for your children. There's a Vietnamese lady I met once. She said to me, "Oh, Thay, I want you to tell my son to be a good boy." And what she meant was that he wanted to be a vet and she wanted him to be a doctor, because a doctor has higher status than a vet. After all, a vet only deals with animals, but a doctor deals with human beings. Her son was a lovely boy. He was a good son. I could see that. And I wasn't going to go and tell him that he shouldn't be a vet. He's not doing anything wrong. In fact, his care for non-human sentient beings is entirely honorable. Mm-hmm. But he's turning out to be different from what she wanted, and that was causing her a lot of problems. So what I say is, look, your children will be the people they are. They're not going to be the people you want them to be. And that will test you. You will be tested by who your children are. And you will have to learn to let go of your expectations. And in life, our expectations are our worst enemies. They set us up for so much sorrow. So be thankful to your children that they are testing you and giving you the opportunity to let go of your expectations and giving you the opportunity to love them just as they are. Your path of renunciation is no less than my path of renunciation. So don't give me this rubbish about your life being less than mine. The parent, when you become a parent, I mean, I have this view. Once I was asked by a man when I was just about to go to my training monastery in the United States, he wanted to know if it was okay for him to leave his wife and start a relationship with another woman and abandon his family. And of course I said, no, that's not okay at all. You mustn't do that, not just because it's a very bad practice from a Buddhist point of view and creates all sorts of terrible, unwholesome karma, but because you model to your sons that their wife is someone that they can throw away when they get sick of her. And that's not okay. And besides which, I spoke to this man as a man to man. I saw my father do that. I saw my father leave my mother, and it caused great sorrow in everybody's life, and it destroyed a family. It didn't really destroy the family because we all still love each other, but you know, it made family life really difficult. My commitment or my conviction is that when a man, and I can only speak as a man, I don't know what life is like as a woman, but when a man becomes a father, his life no longer belongs to him. His life belongs to his children for as long as they need him. There's no two ways about that. You bring children into the world, so you have this most profound karmic connection to your children, and it's your responsibility. You can't get away from that. And sometimes I've met up with Vietnamese men who have become monks and left small babies and their wives behind, and I don't know why the abbots ordain them. The abbots really shouldn't ordain them, because there's a prior karmic commitment there. Let them bring their children up, then become monks. You're never too old to be a monk or a nun. But once you abandon your family, you've created suffering that doesn't stop. So when a man becomes a father and gives his life to his children, he's being a bodhisattva. A moment by moment bodhisattva. A bodhisattva who in each moment provides something, real love for his family, real love for his children. Now, I know that marriages are not easy, and sometimes it makes more sense to bring an end to the marriage. I understand that. I'm not silly, and I'm not a hard line person when things come. But as best you can, if the marriage has to come to an end, if it's just not working, if it's becoming toxic, well then do it as elegantly as you can. Do it as well as you can. It may not be perfect, but it's as well as you can do it. And make sure your children know that they're still your priority. That may still be a hard path, but the Bodhisattva path is not an easy one, in my view. I think that's enough. If you just excuse me for a moment, Lucy wants to be let out to get the water. So I'll just be a moment by moment Bodhisattva. So now's your opportunity to tell me whether I've talked a load of rubbish or what.
Okay, well, this is one of the most beautiful talk, and so heartwarming, so down to earth, so inspiring, and aroused a lot of love within us. So thank you so much. I think you say that this is an extension of your 2 years ago talk, but I think there's more to come. So we need you to come back next month if you are available to continue this, because you don't leave us a lot of time. We only have 8 more minutes for people to ask questions. So I think this everyone here enjoying the talk. I think Frank has questions to ask you, Frank.
It's not a question. It's a heartfelt thank you, Bante, because I've found so much from your life in my life. Oh, you won't believe this. And you're 100% true that Bodhisattva comes from little things. Just very short story. I was 60 years ago in the Hungarian army, -10 in the mountains, and everybody's hungry. And finally, I got a parcel from my wife because I was married quite early. And I ate it by myself. And I overheard the other guys. Frank is very selfish. He never even gave us a bit. I felt so ashamed that that moment I told myself, I'll never be like that. From that day on, when I started eating, I offered the first bite to my wife, she was cooking, etc. And then 2 daughters came here in Sydney already, and then 5 grandchildren. She gave up her job and I worked harder to support my grandchildren. So every day she started cooking. And then it was all right. And at the end, we ate with my wife. But then the kids started to grow up to 2 meters, 4 boys and 1 girl. So I noticed that I had to put the meat back to the big pot because it wasn't enough for the kids. So on the end, we ended up with my wife just eating a slice of bread with butter on it or a tomato. Because she's a smarter person than I am, finally, she ended up buying a 10-liter pot. Then we had our share of food. Now, the oldest is 27, the youngest is just going to university. And I laugh about what good heart we had. And we were happy for it. So they had a big house. I started cleaning the toilet, the bathroom, everything, whatever. And you're so right that the little things make you a bodhisattva. Giving a heart and just serve other people. And now I'm 80-year-old, but I do a lot of charity work and sending money back to my original country, to Hungary, free orphanages. And I do everything. I think it's serving other people and making me happy. Other way, I wouldn't be happy. Sometimes my wife says, oh, Frank, you're a complete fool. Well, don't worry about it. So I thank you, Bante, for telling us your story. And one suggestion, if I may give you, 2 masters, 1 message. It's the life of Jesus Christ and the Buddha. You'll love the book. Before I joined you tonight's Dhamma talk, I went through 1.5 hour Bible study just to support the old Hungarians in the nursing home, etc. It bored me to death because I'm a Buddhist for 50 years. But still, I gave up my dinner just to be with them on the Zoom. I kept eating some biscuits. I don't know if anybody noticed it. I apologize for it. So thanks again, Bante, and please go on the way, and I try to follow you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Frank.
Thanks.
Thank you, Frank. So anyone else would like to say anything? Just feel free to unmute yourself, or you want to say anything today as well. Just feel free to unmute yourself, right?
Thank you.
Okay. Later, I'm going to wash the dishes moment by moment.
That's another Dharma talk about mindfulness.
But what you say is very true. They, like, every little things, if we can just do it with our heart, that is so beautiful.
Can I please say something to Frank from what you said? You told the story of how when you were in the hills, I presume in Hungary, 60 years ago, you ate the bread without offering it to people, and afterwards you felt really remorseful.
Yes.
That is also an aspect of being a bodhisattva. A bodhisattva who can recognize when their behavior has been unwholesome and they change their mind and never do it again. Sometimes that's translated by the Vietnamese as repentance, but the word repentance is problematic for Westerners, at least, who have been Christians. It's more about beginning anew. And in the Bodhicharyavatara, in the Guide to the Bodhisattva Path, I think it's the very first or second chapter is about how the Bodhisattva always recognizes what they have done that has been unwholesome, and they turn around and they go in a new direction. And that's what you did.
Thank you, Bhante.
That was the work of a Bodhisattva. You turned around and you've never gone back.
No,
You've continued to live a life for the sake of others. That's Bodhisattva.
Thank you, Bhante. Thank you.
Okay. So it's coming to 9 o'clock. That's the end of our session. So probably they will be a bit tired now. It's Lucy, it's also...
Oh, Lucy's in bed asleep.
Is there asleep now? So yeah, so we thank you so much, Dave, for your time and for your lovely talks tonight with us. And we really hope that we will hear your talk again soon. I will be in contact with you soon. See whether you can come back for another talk for us. Okay. So
to dedicate the merit.
Yes, please.
May the wholesome energy that we have generated here tonight and at any other time in our lives be for the benefit of all living beings. May all living beings be well and happy. May all living beings be free from suffering. May all living beings know peace and joy and the causes of peace and joy. And may we all continue to walk the Buddha's path of truth and love together. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Thay. Thank you so much. And good night, everyone.
Good night.
Yeah. See you next week.
See.